Hello, I'm Sharina Huntsman, and I'm excited to talk to you about alternative text today and give you some pointers and some guidelines on how to create alternative text in multiple formats, depending on what your use is in all of your documents. Let's start by defining what alt text is. Alt text stands for alternative text, and it is the text that sits within your document and represents an image in a digital format. It will load when there is not enough bandwidth to load an image. So if I open up my phone and I don't have enough bandwidth, the alt text will load when an image won't. That also happens with websites when I'm on my laptop or in a desktop when I don't have the Wi-Fi connection that I would like to have. The alt text will load when an image can't. So it's good for all users. It becomes part of the HTML coding within a document, which means that it can be read by a screen reader, because that's what a screen reader reads, is our HTML coding. It is more than description. It is meaning making. We put our images in our documents for specific purposes, and our alt text need to match those purposes and create that same experience for all users. Alt text can be added to a document after the document is written. It could be a retrofit, but it's much easier to write alt text when you're writing the document. The originator of the document or the author of the document is the best person to write alt text because they understand the content that the image is presenting or representing. They have specific knowledge about that content that they want to be expressed through that image, and they know how that image fits into the purpose of the document, why the document is being created for other people, and how that image fits into that purpose. So it's easier and it's more effective to write alt text as you're constructing the document. The first step in writing effective alt text is to understand the purpose of why you're using the image in a document. And it might be easier to think about those images in three ways. Either they are a decorative image, meaning that they're meant to add a visual appeal to the document, but they don't really add content. And if I were to take them away, they wouldn't disrupt the meaning in a document. An example document is an image of something that is already described thoroughly within the document, and the image is just added as an example of what's already been described. The supplemental image is meant to add more support for a point that's brought up within the document, but it provides additional information, it provides content, and it provides more meaning. These are the more complicated images. Let's talk about those three and break them down into what might be some examples of a decorative image or an example image or a supplemental image, and how we might use strategies to create effective alt text for each one of those types of images. So the first type of image I want to talk about is our decorative images. These are images individuals in a web page listing employees, for example. They might be the logo for the organization. If my document is a reminder about an upcoming training, I might include an image of where that training will be held, or I might include an image of the person who's presenting the training. These type of images don't necessarily add meaning or additional content to a document. They enhance what's already there. So for example, I have this picture of the balloon in my slide. This might be an image that I choose to include in a flyer that's talking about an upcoming event. This image doesn't necessarily give information about that flyer or about that event. It adds an appeal, a visual appeal of excitement. These are images that I would just give a simple description to. So strategies for creating alt text for decorative images are to keep them simple. Think about all of the relevant details. For example, I have here the Boise State B, which is one of the logos for Boise State. And I've given you an example of the alt text that I would write for this image, the Boise State University logo, the letter B. And I included the letter B because Boise State has multiple logos, and I want them to be specific about what logo I'm representing here. I'm trying to give the exact same experience or a similar experience, an equal experience, to people who can read that text or have a screen reader read to that, or people who visually are looking at that image. The next type of image that I want to talk about and introduce you to is example images. These are images that we use in our documents to exemplify what's already being talked about in the text. So if we are thoroughly describing an idea or a concept, and then we pull in an image just to help facilitate understanding of that content or that new idea, that is what an example image is doing. So for example, if I'm describing safety equipment use in my document, I might include an image of that equipment. For example, a fire extinguisher. If my document includes directions for new protocols for submitting HR documents, I might include a simple image visually representing the process, similar to what I have put on my slide here. It has 3 objects equally placed within a circle and arrows indicating a direction, a circular process where one connects to the next. The most effective strategy I have for writing alt text for example images is to ensure that alt text describes and explains how the image is an example of the information covered in the text. I do this by using a consistency in my terminology and the idea, so that it feels like a flow between the information that's in the text and the information that's in the alt text. For example, if I were going to write alt text for this particular slide, I would write slide of strategies for writing alt text for example images. I wouldn't give that strategy again because it's already written in the text. The last type of image I want to introduce you to today is the content images or supplemental images. These are the ones that create meaning for us. They do work within our documents. They are more than just supplementing what's already in the text itself or giving examples of what's already in the text. They're creating that meaning for us. We're making our images work a great deal. These are graph information, pie charts, scatter plots, images of complex processes, maps, diagrams. Any image that if I were to take it out of my document, I would lose meaning. There would be something missing in my document without that image. These are probably the most difficult to write alt text for, and when we start writing them, they get very descriptive, very complex, and very long. And that's one of the ways you can tell you have a content image when you get working in that alt text and you find that you're writing multiple sentences. So let me give you some strategies to maybe deal with those. So when we find that we are writing multiple sentences to try to describe the meaning within an image, we know that we're in a content or supplemental image. As we're doing that work, we recognize that this is information that all of our users or audience needs to understand or know. So this is where we want to take those heavy descriptions and move them out of alt text and put them right within the document next to the images so that all users can read that information. For example, describing the findings that are represented in a pie chart in the text or the markings on a map. These, again, might be important to all users, and so we want to give that rich description or that rich meaning to all of our users. When we do that work within our documents, our alt text in the image becomes more like an example image. We can write the appropriate alt text similar to what we did before, referencing the same terms and the same ideas that we just did in the description within our document. Now that we know what kind of image we are going to be using within our document and its purpose within that document, the next step is actually writing the alt text. And how do we begin that? It's important that we help our user or our audience know what kind of information is coming next to situate that information. So sometimes we want to make sure that we give them an indicator of what this content is. For example, if it's a pie chart, if it's a table, if it's a splatter chart, if it's a drawing, if it's a photograph, we want to give them that information up front so that they understand what's being described within the sentences. What we want to not do or not start our sentences with is image of. Everything that we're describing is all going to be images. As you begin to write your alt text, there are some tips that you want to remember. Always be specific and concise in your details. Remember, think about the purpose. It'll help you determine which details are essential or important to creating meaning from that image. Keep the terms in the alt text consistent with what's happening in the document. If you're calling it a fire extinguisher within the document, don't call it something else within the alt text. You have to consider what details are relevant to the purpose of the image. Is color going to be relevant? Is that something that's important? Is the size important? Is the amount important? I go back to the example of my balloons. The fact that there were multiple colors might have been important. Is the number of balloons important? This is the questions that I want to ask myself as I'm creating this alt text. So, for example, do I write, is it just a beach? Or is it a, quote, a beach with a calm ocean waves peacefully crawling across the sand to stimulate the even, peaceful goals of meditative breathing? Both of those are completely correct alt text. It depends on what my purpose is. The shorter one perhaps is more of, it's a decorative image. The second one actually creates meaning, and it was taken from a psychology book talking about meditative breathing. The image was creating a meaning about what that feels like to do meditative breathing, which is why the details were more important. Now that you've created your alt text, it's important to understand how to implement it within your document. So I'm going to give you just a few examples. This is a screenshot of a PowerPoint presentation. I'm using an image of some deer that I took in my last vacation out in our beautiful Idaho woods. To illustrate to you how to use the alt text is part of the image formatting menu, and it can be accessed on the top ribbon, or it can be accessed by right-clicking on the image itself. When you click Edit Alt Text, you'll be given a text box to put your alt text in. You can either originate it there, or you can cut and paste. Because Word is a Microsoft product as well, it looks very similar to PowerPoint. You'll find the menu in exactly the same spot across the top, or by left-clicking on your image, as I have done with this screenshot to show you both menus. Add or Edit Alt Text will give you the text box to put your alt text within. You can either originate it there or cut and paste it. PDF works a little bit different. It's an Adobe product, and it looks a little different than a Microsoft product. You have to have Adobe Pro in order to edit the alt text within the PDF. And it is part of the accessibility checker function within the document. If you'll notice here, this is a screenshot of a PDF taken from Boise State. On the right side menu, towards the bottom, located in purple, is the accessibility checker indicator. If you click on that, it will give you an opportunity to create an accessibility report. It will also give you the option of editing alt text. If you click on the Edit Alt Text, it will take you through each part of the images on the document and open up a text box for you to include the alt text. It may take a little bit more practice, and it's maybe not as intuitive as the Microsoft, but it's still possible to do. Before I leave you today, I wanted to give you just a few more key points to think about as you're creating your alt text. Alt text is about creating meaning. It's not just about describing what you can physically see. It's about what those images represent and how they are functioning within your document to help create access to information. If you include an image in your document, it has a purpose. So I'm going to advise that you avoid using the, quote, decorative term as alt text. At least describe what the image is, even if it's just a few words. Social media is an image-centric platform, but the software in it does not prompt you to add alt text and it does not have an accessibility checker, which means that when we're creating social media content, this means that we must be vigilant in our postings to make sure that we're including our alternative text in that format. Thank you for your time. I wish I could have been with you today, but I appreciate your attention, and I'm excited that you'll be creating effective alt text. If you have any questions, feel free to talk to me. I'm always happy to talk about and discuss accessibility with anyone. Thank you.